Hello there, everyone. Good evening, and welcome back to the study of Plato's Republic. And I'm very much looking forward to sharing Book 6 with you, because Book 6 has within it the simile of the sun and the divided line, which is very philosophical and deals with the two different levels of reality, but all that to come. As always, before I begin, I'll just review quickly what we covered in Book 5 before previewing briefly Book 6, and I get all this information thanks to the Penguin Classic Edition, where I take all of the italics from, just to help us to understand what part of the Republic we are in. And in Book 5, we started the book with the status of women in the ideal state, marriage and family life in the ideal state, promotion, demotion, and infanticide. Some very interesting ideas there. The rules of war, and then we came towards the end of Book 5, the philosopher ruler, the ideal and the actual, which sort of comes into the simile of the sun somewhat, and then Plato's definition of a philosopher and the two areas of reality. And Book 6 coming up, we're going to continue the discussion of the philosopher and different aspects, and then Plato speaks about the prejudice against philosophy and the corruption of the philosophic nature of contemporary society. Socrates was put to death in the Phaedo, and this has obviously affected Plato a great deal. The fact that his teacher and guru has been put to death for being a philosopher ultimately. And then we come to the philosopher ruler is not impossible. The fact that these things can be achieved. The good as the ultimate object of knowledge, which is an introduction to the simile of the sun, which builds upon the two orders of reality, and then the divided line. And so I'm very much looking forward, excited to get into Book 6 of the Republic. So I think we'll do that straight away. As I always say, if you guys want to support me here at Book Club, please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share the show, the study with your friends. And there's numerous ways you can support, and you can find all of those in the description. But for now, let's get into the Republic, Book 6. And so, Glaucon, I said, after a somewhat lengthy and difficult discussion, both the philosophers and the non-philosophers came to light as who they are. It probably wouldn't have been easy, he said, to have them do it in a shorter one. Apparently not. But for my part, I think that the matter would have been better illuminated if we had only it to discuss, and not all the other things that remain to be treated, in order to discover the difference between the just life and the unjust one. What's our next topic? What else but the one that's next in order? Since those who are able to grasp what is always the same in all respects are philosophers, while those who are not able to do so, and who wander among the many things that vary in every sort of way, are not philosophers, which of the two should be the leaders in a city? What would be a sensible answer to that? We should establish as guardians those who are clearly capable of guarding the laws and the ways of life of the city. That's right. And isn't it clear that a guardian who is to keep watch over anything should be keen-sighted rather than blind? Of course it's clear. Do you think then that there's any difference between the blind and those who are really deprived of the knowledge of each thing that is? The latter have no clear model in their souls, and so they cannot, in the manner of painters, look to what is most true, make constant reference to it, and study it as exactly as possible. Hence they cannot establish here on earth conventions about what is fine or just or good when they need to be established, or guard and preserve them once they have been established. No, by God, there isn't much difference between them. Should we then make these blind people our guardians, or rather those who know each thing that is, and who are not inferior to the others, either in experience or in any other part of virtue? It would be absurd to choose anyone but the ones who have knowledge, if indeed they're not inferior in these ways, for the respect in which they are superior is pretty well the most important one. Then shouldn't we explain how it is possible for people to come to have both these sorts of qualities? Certainly. Then, as we said at the beginning of this discussion, it is necessary to understand first the nature of the ones who are going to come to have both sorts, for I think that if we can reach adequate agreement about that, we'll also agree that the same people can have both qualities, and that no one but they should be leaders in cities. How so? Let's agree that philosophic natures always love the sort of learning that makes clear to them some feature of the being that always is and does not wander around between coming to be and decaying. And further, let's agree that, like the honor lovers and erotically inclined men we described before, they love all such learning and are not willing to give up any part of it, whether large or small, more valuable or less so. That's right. Consider next whether the people we're describing must also have this in their nature. What? They must be without falsehood. They must refuse to accept what is false, hate it, and have a love for the truth. That's a reasonable addition, at any rate. It's not only reasonable, it's entirely necessary, for it's necessary for a man who is erotically inclined by nature to love everything akin to or belonging to the boy he loves. That's right. And could you find anything that belongs more to wisdom than truth does? Of course not. Then is it possible for the same nature to be a philosopher, a lover of wisdom, and a lover of falsehood? Not at all. Then someone who loves learning must above all strive for every kind of truth from childhood on. Absolutely. Now, we surely know that when someone's desires incline strongly for one thing, they are thereby weakened for others, just like a stream that has been partly diverted into another channel. Of course. Then, when someone's desires flow towards learning and everything of that sort, they'd be concerned, I suppose, with the pleasures of the soul itself, by itself, and they'd abandon those pleasures that come through the body, if indeed he is a true philosopher, and not merely a counterfeit one. That's completely necessary. Then surely such a person is moderate, and not at all a money lover. It's appropriate for others to take seriously the things for which money and large expenditures are needed, but not for him. That's right. And of course there's also this to consider when you are judging whether a nature is philosophic or not. What's that? If it is at all slavish, you should not overlook the fact, for pettiness is altogether incompatible with a soul that is always reaching out to grasp everything both divine and human as a whole. That's completely true. And will a thinker, high-minded enough to study all the time and all being, consider human life to be something important? He couldn't possibly. Then will he consider death to be a terrible thing? He least of all. Then it seems a cowardly and slavish nature will take no part in true philosophy. Not in my opinion. And is there any way that an orderly person who isn't money-loving, slavish, a boaster, or a coward could become unreliable or unjust? There isn't. Moreover, when you are looking to see whether a soul is philosophic or not, you'll look to see whether it is just and gentle from youth on, or savage and hard to associate with. Certainly. And here's something I think you won't leave out. What? Whether he's a slow learner or a fast one. Or do you ever expect anyone to love something when it pains him to do it, and when much effort brings only small return? No, it couldn't happen. And what if he could retain nothing of what he learned, because he was full of forgetfulness? Could he fail to be empty of knowledge? How could he? Then don't you think that, if he's labouring in vain, he'd inevitably come to hate both himself and that activity in the end? Of course. Then let's never include a forgetful soul among those who are sufficiently philosophical for our purposes, but look for one with a good memory. Absolutely. Now, we'd certainly say that the unmusical and graceless element in a person's nature draws him to lack of due measure. Of course. And do you think that truth is akin to what lacks due measure, or to what is measured? to what is measured. Then, in addition to those other things, let's look for someone whose thought is by nature measured and graceful, and is easily led to the form of each thing that is. Of course. Well then, don't you think that the properties we've enumerated are compatible with one another, and that each is necessary to a soul that is to have an adequate and complete grasp of that which is? They're all completely necessary. Is there any objection you can find, then, to a pursuit that no one can adequately follow unless he's by nature good at remembering, quick to learn, high-minded, graceful, and a friend and relative of truth, justice, courage, and moderation? Not even Momus could find one. When such people have reached maturity in age and education, wouldn't you entrust the city to them, and them alone? And so that's the first part, and now we come to hello there, green grapes, welcome. I hope you're enjoying Plato. Now we come to Plato speaking about the prejudice against the philosophers and the corruption in the state towards the philosophic nature in contemporary society. So he's going to speak about how the regular citizens don't have the respect and love for philosophy and philosophers and the philosophic nature that Plato feels they deserve. The prejudice against philosophy and the corruption of the philosophic nature in contemporary society. Adeimantus objects that, however well all this sounds in theory, in practice philosophers are either useless or dangerous. Socrates replies that the better type of philosopher is useless because contemporary democratic society has no use for him, and so he has no alternative but to stand aside from the corruption of political life, and that the philosophic character is only dangerous when corrupted. Besides, there are plenty of charlatans who will take the place of the philosopher and will bring out the worst in the public they flatter. Two things should be remembered in this section. First, Plato's distrust of the workings of democracy as he had seen it in Athens. There are few more vivid condemnations of the ways of democratic politicians than the similes of the sea captain and of the large and powerful animal. Today we should also remember the operation of the mass media. And again, this is taken from a book published in around the 1960s. So, how much more all-encompassing has the mass media become in our modern day? Second, his dislike of the educational tradition represented by the contemporary school of Isocrates. Isocrates continued the tradition started by the sophists of a general education centered upon rhetoric, the art of public speaking and self-expression. Plato, who it should be remembered, also regarded his academy as a school for statesmen, insisted on a more rigorous intellectual discipline of the kind to be outlined in Book 7. Isocrates thought Plato unrealistic. Plato thought Isocrates superficial. And so keep an eye out for when Plato here compares democratic politicians to the similes of the sea captain. It's very funny when we consider our modern day politicians. But back to the text. And Adeimantus replied, "No one would be able to contradict the things you've said, Socrates, but on each occasion that you say them, your hearers are affected in some way, such as this. They think that because they're inexperienced in asking and answering questions, they're led astray a little bit by the argument at every question, and that, when these little bits are added together at the end of the discussion, great is their fall, as the opposite of what they said at the outset comes to light. Just as inexperienced checker players are trapped by the experts in the end and can't make a move, so they too are trapped in the end and have nothing to say in this different kind of checkers, which is played not with discs but with words. Yet the truth isn't affected by this outcome. I say this with a view to the present case, for someone might well say now that he's unable to oppose you as you ask each of your questions, yet he sees that all of those who take up philosophy, not those who merely dabble in it while still young, in order to complete their upbringing and then drop it, but those who continue in it for a longer time. The greatest number become cranks, not to say completely vicious, while those who seem completely decent are rendered useless to the city because of the studies you recommend. When I'd heard him out, I said, "Do you think that what these people say is false?" "I don't know, but I'd be glad to hear what you think." "You'd hear that they seem to me to speak the truth. How then can it be true to say that there will be no end to evils in our cities until philosophers, people we agree to be useless, rule in them? The question you ask needs to be answered by means of an image or simile. And you, of course, aren't used to speaking in similes. So, are you making fun of me now that you've landed me with a claim that's so hard to establish? In any case, listen to my simile and you'll appreciate all the more how greedy for images I am. What the most decent people experience in relation to their city is so hard to bear that there's no other single experience like it. Hence, to find an image of it and a defence for them, I must construct it from many sources, just as painters paint goat stags by combining the features of different things. Imagine then that something like the following happens on a ship, or on many ships. The ship owner is bigger and stronger than everyone else on board, but he's hard of hearing, a bit short-sighted, and his knowledge of seafaring is equally deficient. The sailors are quarrelling with one another about steering the ship, each of them thinking that he should be the captain, even though he's never learned the art of navigation, cannot point to anyone who taught it to him, or to a time when he learned it. Indeed, they claim that it isn't teachable, and are ready to cut to pieces anyone who says that it is. They're always crowding around the ship owner, begging him to do everything possible to get him to turn the rudder over to them. And sometimes, if they don't succeed in persuading him, they execute the ones who do succeed, or throw them overboard, and then, having stupefied their noble ship owner with drugs, wine, or in some other way, they rule the ship, using up what's in it and sailing while drinking and feasting in the way that people like that are prone to do. Moreover, they call the person who is clever at persuading or forcing the ship owner to let them rule a navigator, a captain, and one who knows ships, and dismiss anyone else as useless. They don't understand that a true captain must pay attention to the seasons of the year, the sky, the stars, the winds, and all that pertains to his craft, if he's really to be the ruler of a ship. And they don't believe there is any craft that would enable him to determine how he should steer the ship, whether the others want him to or not, or any possibility of mastering this alleged craft, or of practicing it at the same time as the craft of navigation. Don't you think that the true captain will be called a real stargazer, a babbler, and a good-for-nothing by those who sail in ships governed in that way, in which such things happen? I certainly do. I don't think that you need to examine the simile in detail to see that the ships resemble cities and their attitude to the true philosophers, but you already understand what I mean. Indeed I do. Then first tell this simile to anyone who wonders why philosophers aren't honoured in the cities, and try to persuade him that there would be far more cause for wonder if they were honoured. I will tell him. Next, tell him that what he says is true, that the most decent among the philosophers are useless to the majority. Tell him not to blame those decent people for this, but the ones who don't make use of them. It isn't natural for the captain to beg the sailors to be ruled by him, nor for the wise to knock at the doors of the rich. The man who came up with that wisecrack made a mistake. The natural thing is for the sick person, rich or poor, to knock at the doctor's door, and for anyone who needs to be ruled to knock at the door of the one who can rule him. It isn't for the ruler, if he's truly any use, to beg the others to accept his rule. Tell him that he'll make no mistake in likening those who rule in our cities at present to the sailors we mentioned just now, and those who are called useless stargazers to the true captains. That's absolutely right. Therefore, it isn't easy for the best ways of life to be highly esteemed by people who, as in these circumstances, follow the opposite ways. By far the greatest and most serious slander on philosophy, however, results from those who profess to follow the philosophic way of life. I mean those of whom the prosecutor of philosophy declared that the greatest number are completely vicious and the most decent useless. And I admitted that what he said was true, didn't I? Yes. And haven't we explained why the decent ones are useless? Yes, indeed. Then do you want us to discuss why it's inevitable that the greater number are vicious and try to... Then do you want next... This is why editing it, I can cut all this out. Then, do you next want us to discuss why it's inevitable that the greater number are vicious and to try to show, if we can, that philosophy isn't responsible for this either? Certainly. Then let's begin our dialogue by reminding ourselves of the point at which we began to discuss the nature that someone must have if he is to become a fine and good person. First of all, if you remember, he had to be guided by the truth, and always pursue it in every way, or else he'd really be a boaster, with no share at all in true philosophy. That's what was said. And isn't this view completely contrary to the opinions currently held about him? It certainly is. Then won't it be reasonable for us to plead in his defence that it is the nature of the real lover of learning to struggle towards what is, not to remain with any of the many things that are believed to be, that, as he moves on, he neither loses nor lessens his erotic love until he grasps the being of each nature itself with the part of his soul that is fitted to grasp it, because of its kinship with it, and that, once getting near what really is, and having intercourse with it, and having begotten understanding and truth, he knows, truly lives, is nourished, and, at that point, but not before, is relieved from the pains of giving birth. That is the most reasonable defence possible. Well then, will such a person have any part in the love of falsehood, or will he entirely hate it? He'll hate it. And if truth led the way, we'd never say, I suppose, that a chorus of evils could ever follow in its train. How could it? But rather a healthy and just character, with moderation following it? That's right. What need is there, then, to marshal all over again from the beginning the members of the philosophic nature's chorus in their inevitable array? Remember that courage, high-mindedness, ease in learning, and a good memory all belong to it. Then you objected, saying that anyone would be compelled to agree with what we said, but that, if he abandoned the argument and looked at the very people the argument is about, he'd say that some of them were useless, while the majority had every kind of vice. So we examine the reason for this slander, and have now arrived at the point of explaining why the majority of them are bad. And it's for this reason that we've again taken up the nature of the true philosophers and divined what it necessarily has to be. That's true. We must now look at the ways in which this nature is corrupted, how it's destroyed in many people, while a small number, the ones that are called useless rather than bad, escape. After all, we must look in turn at the natures of the souls that imitate the philosophic nature and establish themselves in its pursuits, so as to see what the people are like who thereby arrive at pursuits they are unworthy of, and that is beyond them, and who, because they often strike false notes, bring upon philosophy the reputation that you said it has with everyone everywhere. In what ways is this nature corrupted? I'll try to enumerate them for you if I can. I suppose that everyone would agree that only a few natures possess all the qualities that we just now said were essential to becoming a complete philosopher, and that seldom occur naturally among human beings. Or don't you think so? I certainly do. Consider, then, the many important ways in which these few can be corrupted. What are they? What will surprise you most when you hear What will surprise you most when you hear it is that each of the things we praised in that nature tends to corrupt the soul that has it and to drag it away from philosophy. I mean courage, moderation, and the other things we mentioned. That does sound strange. Furthermore, all the things that are said to be good also corrupt it and drag it away. Beauty, wealth, physical strength, relatives who are powerful in the city, and all that goes with these. You understand what I have in mind? I do, and I'll be glad to learn about it more precisely. Correctly grasp the general point I'm after, and it will be clear to you, and what I've said before won't seem so strange. What do you want me to do? We know that the more vigorous any seed developing plant or animal is, the more it is deficient in the things that are appropriate for it to have when it is deprived of suitable food, season, or location, for the bad is more opposed to the good than it is to the merely not good. Of course. Then it's reasonable to say that the best nature fares worse when unsuitably nurtured than an ordinary one. It is. Then won't we say the same thing about souls too, Adamanthus? That those with the best natures become outstandingly bad when they receive a bad upbringing? Or do you think that great injustices and pure wickedness originate in an ordinary nature rather than in a vigorous one that has been corrupted by its upbringing? Or that a weak nature is ever the cause of either great good or great evil? No, you're right. Now, I think that the philosophic nature as we defined it will inevitably grow to possess every virtue if it happens to receive appropriate instruction, but if it is sown, planted, and grown in an inappropriate environment, it will develop in quite the opposite way, unless some god happens to come to its rescue. Or do you agree with the general opinion that certain young people are actually corrupted by sophists, that there are certain sophists with significant influence on the young who corrupt them through private teaching? Isn't it rather the very people who say this who are the greatest sophists of all, since they educate most completely, turning young and old, men and women into precisely the kind of people they want them to be? When do they do that? When many of them are sitting together in assemblies, courts, theatres, army camps, or in some other public gathering of the crowd, they object very loudly and excessively to some of the things that are said or done, and approve others in the same way, shouting and clapping, so that the very rocks and surroundings echo the din of their praise or blame and double it. In circumstances like that, what is the effect, as they say, on a young person's heart? What private training can hold out and not be swept away by that kind of praise or blame, and be carried by the flood wherever it goes, so that he'll say that the same things are beautiful or ugly as the crowd does, follow the same pursuits as they do, and be the same sort of person as they are? He will be under great compulsion to do so, Socrates. And yet we haven't mentioned the greatest compulsion of all. What's that? It's what these educators and sophists impose by their actions, if their words fail to persuade. Or don't you know that they punish anyone who isn't persuasive with disenfranchisement, fines, or death? They most certainly do. What other sophists, then, or what private conversations do you think will prevail in opposition to these? I don't suppose that any will. No, indeed, it would be very foolish even to try to oppose them, for there isn't now, hasn't been in the past, nor ever will be in the future anyone with a character so unusual that he has been educated to virtue in spite of the contrary education he received from the mob. I mean a human character. The divine, as the saying goes, is an exception to the rule. You should realize that if anyone is saved and becomes what he ought to be under our present constitutions, he has been saved, you might rightly say, by a divine dispensation. I agree. Well then, you should also agree to this. What? Not one of those paid private teachers whom the people call sophists and consider to be their rivals in craft teaches anything other than the convictions that the majority express when they are gathered together. Indeed, these are precisely what the sophists call wisdom. It's as if someone were learning the moods and appetites of a huge, strong beast that he's rearing, how to approach and handle it, when it is most difficult to deal with or most gentle, and what makes it so, what sounds it utters in either condition, and what sounds soothe or anger it. Having learned all this through tending the beast over a period of time, he calls this knack wisdom, gathers his information together as if it were a craft, and starts to teach it. In truth, he knows nothing about which of these convictions is fine or shameful, good or bad, just or unjust, but he applies all these names in accordance with how the beast reacts, calling what it enjoys good and what angers it bad. He has no other account to give of these terms, and he calls what he is compelled to do just and fine, for he hasn't seen and cannot show anyone else how much compulsion and goodness really differ. Don't you think, by God, that someone like that is a strange educator? I do indeed. Then does this person seem any different from the one who believes that it is wisdom to understand the moods and pleasures of a majority gathered from all quarters, whether they concern painting, music, or, for that matter, politics? If anyone approaches the majority to exhibit his poetry, or some other piece of craftsmanship, or his service to the city, and gives them mastery over him to any degree beyond what's unavoidable, he'll be under Diomedean compulsion, as it's called, to do the sort of thing of which they approve. But have you ever heard anyone presenting an argument that such things are truly good and beautiful that wasn't absolutely ridiculous? No, and I don't expect ever to hear one. Keeping all this in mind, recall the following question. Can the majority in any way tolerate or accept the reality of the beautiful itself, as opposed to the many beautiful things, or the reality of each thing itself, as opposed to the corresponding many? Not in any way. Then the majority cannot be philosophic. They cannot. Hence they inevitably disapprove of those who practice philosophy. Inevitably. And so do all those private individuals who associate with the majority and try to please them. Clearly. Then, because of all that, do you see any salvation for someone who is by nature a philosopher to ensure that he'll practice philosophy correctly to the end? Think about what we've said before. We agreed that ease in learning, a good memory, courage, and high-mindedness belong to the philosophic nature. Yes. And won't someone with a nature like that be first among the children in everything, especially if his body has a nature that matches that of his soul? How could he not be? Then I suppose that, as he gets older, his family and fellow citizens will want to make use of him in connection with their own affairs. Of course. Therefore they'll pay court to him with their requests and honours, trying by their flattery to secure for themselves ahead of time the power that is going to be his. That's usually what happens at any rate. What do you think someone like that will do in such circumstances, especially if he happens to be from a great city in which he's rich, well-born, good-looking, and tall? Won't he be filled with impractical expectations, and think himself capable of managing the affairs not only of the Greeks, but of the barbarians as well? And as a result, won't he exalt himself to great heights, and be brimming with pretension and pride that is empty and lacks understanding? He certainly will. And if someone approaches a young man in that condition and gently tells him the truth, namely, that there's no understanding in him, that he needs it, and that it can't be acquired unless he works like a slave to attain it, do you think that it will be easy for him to listen when he's in the midst of so many evils? Far from it. And even if a young man of that sort somehow sees the point and is guided and drawn to philosophy because of his noble nature and his kinship with reason, what do you think those people will do if they believe that they're losing their use of him and his companionship? Is there anything they won't do or say to him to prevent him from being persuaded? Or anything they won't do or say about his persuader, whether plotting against him in private or publicly bringing him into court, to prevent him from such persuasion? There certainly isn't. Then, is there any chance that such a person will practice philosophy? None at all. Do you see, then, that we weren't wrong to say that when someone with a philosophic nature is badly brought up, the very components of his nature, together with the other so-called goods, such as wealth and other similar advantages, are themselves in a way the cause of his falling away from philosophic pursuits? I do, and what we said was right. These, then, are the many ways in which the best nature, which is already rare enough, as we said, is destroyed and corrupted, so that it cannot follow the best pursuits. And it is among these men that we find the ones who do the greatest evils to cities and individuals, and also, if they happen to be swept that way by the current, the greatest good, for a petty nature will never do anything great, either to an individual or a city. That's very true. When these men, for whom philosophy is most appropriate, fall away from her, they leave her desolate and unwed, and they themselves lead lives that are inappropriate and untrue. Then others, who are unworthy of her, come to her as an orphan deprived of the protection of kinsmen, and disgrace her. These are the ones who are responsible for the reproaches that you say are cast upon philosophy by those who revile her, namely, that some of those who consort with her are useless, while the majority deserve to suffer many bad things. Yes, that is indeed what is said. And it's a reasonable thing to say for other little men, the ones who are most sophisticated at their own little crafts, seeing that this position, which is full of fine names and adornments, is vacated, leap gladly from those little crafts to philosophy, like prisoners escaping from jail who take refuge in a temple. Despite her present poor state, philosophy is still more high-minded than these other crafts, so that many people with defective natures desire to possess her, even though their souls are cramped and spoiled by the mechanical nature of their work, in just the way that their bodies are mutilated by their crafts and labours. Isn't that inevitable? It certainly is. Don't you think that a man of this sort looks exactly like a little bald-headed tinker who has come into some money and, having been just released from jail, has taken a bath, put on a new cloak, got himself up as a bridegroom, and is about to marry the boss's daughter because she is poor and abandoned? They are exactly the same. And what kind of children will that marriage produce? Won't they be illegitimate and inferior? They have to be. What about when men who are unworthy of education approach philosophy and consort with her unworthily? What kinds of thoughts and opinions are we to say they beget? Won't they truly be what are properly called sophisms, things that have nothing genuine about them, or worthy of being called true wisdom? That's absolutely right. Then there remains, Adamantus, only a very small group who consort with philosophy in a way that's worthy of her. A noble and well-brought-up character, for example, kept down by exile, who remains with philosophy according to his nature, because there is no one to corrupt him, or a great soul living in a small city, who disdains the city's affairs and looks beyond them. A very few might be drawn to philosophy from other crafts that they rightly despise because they have good natures, and some might be held back by the bridle that restrains our friend Theages, for he's in every way qualified to be tempted away from philosophy, but his physical illness restrains him by keeping him out of politics. Finally, my own case is hardly worth mentioning, my daemonic sign, because it has happened to no one before me, or to only very few. And just quickly there, that reference, demonic sign, is to what he speaks about in the Alcibiades. So yeah, you can go and read the Alcibiades if you want to know more about that. Now, the members of this small group have tasted how sweet and blessed a possession philosophy is, and at the same time they've also seen the madness of the majority and realized, in a word, that hardly anyone acts sanely in public affairs, and that there is no ally with whom they might go to the aid of justice and survive, that instead they'd perish before they could profit either their city or their friends, and be useless both to themselves and to others, just like a man who has fallen among wild animals, and is neither willing to join them in doing injustice, nor sufficiently strong to oppose the general savagery alone. Taking all this into account, they'd lead a quiet life, and do their own work. Thus, someone who takes refuge under a little wall from a storm of dust or hail driven by the wind, the philosopher, seeing others filled with lawlessness, is satisfied if he can somehow lead his present life free from injustice and impious acts, and depart from it with good hope, blameless and content. Well, that's no small thing for him to have accomplished before departing. But it isn't the greatest either, since he didn't chance upon a constitution that suits him. Under a suitable one, his own growth will be fuller, and he'll save the community as well as himself. And there Plato talks about the corrupted nature. Hello there, Saeed, welcome. And he talks about the corrupted nature of the contemporary society, and there's lots of echoes for me between Gurdjieff and Plato. Gurdjieff would say that higher states of consciousness, they're not for everyone, they're only for a few, and here Plato is saying something similar, in that the philosophic nature, or, you know, a true philosopher, it's a rare thing, it's not for everyone, it's not common among the masses. And now we come to a section where Plato speaks and discusses how the philosophic ruler, or the ruler philosopher, is not impossible. So yes, very interesting. And hello there, Ryan, welcome. I'm glad you're here and can make it. And book 6 is just getting interesting. So I hope you're free and can stick around to the end. And yeah, we can have a discussion at the end. So let's get to the introduction to this next section. The philosopher ruler, not impossible. There is nothing inherently impossible in the idea of a philosopher ruler. Philosophers might gain political power, or an existing ruler might become a philosopher, and the public would soon be persuaded of the benefits of philosophic rule. But the philosophic training must be the right one, and the changes in society would have to be radical. It seems to me that we've now sensibly discussed the reason why philosophy is slandered and why the slander is unjust, unless, of course, you have something to add. I have nothing to add on that point, but which of our present constitutions do you think is suitable for philosophers? None of them. That's exactly my complaint. None of our present constitutions is worthy of the philosophic nature, and as a result, this nature is perverted and altered. For, just as a foreign seed sown in alien ground is likely to be overcome by the native species and to fade away among them, so the philosophic nature fails to develop its full power and declines into a different character. But if it were to find the best constitution, as it is itself the best, it would be clear that it is really divine, and that other natures and ways of life are merely human. Obviously, you're going to ask next what the best constitution is. You're wrong there. I wasn't going to ask that, but whether it was the constitution we described when we were founding our city, or some other one. In the other respects, it is that one. But we said, even then, that there must always be some people in the city who have a theory of the constitution, the same one that guided you, the lawgiver, when you made the laws. We did say that. Yes, but we didn't emphasize it sufficiently, for fear of what your objections have made plain, namely, that its proof would be long and difficult, and indeed what remains is by no means easy to go through. What's that? How a city can engage in philosophy without being destroyed, for all great things are prone to fall, and, as the saying goes, fine things are really hard to achieve. Nevertheless, to complete our discussion, we'll have to get clear about this. If anything prevents us from doing it, it won't be lack of willingness, but lack of ability. At least you'll see how willing I am, for notice again how enthusiastically and recklessly I say that the manner in which a city ought to take up the philosophic way of life is the opposite of what it does at present. How? At present, those who study philosophy do so as young men who have left childhood behind and have yet to take up household management and money-making. But just when they reach the hardest part, I mean the part that has to do with giving a rational account, they abandon it and are regarded as fully trained in philosophy. In later life, they think they're doing well if they are willing to be in an invited audience when others are doing philosophy, for they think they should do this only as a sideline. And with a few exceptions, by the time they reach old age, their eagerness for philosophy is quenched more thoroughly than the sun of Heraclitus, which is never rekindled. What should they do? Entirely the opposite. As youths and children, they should put their minds to youthful education and philosophy, and take care of their bodies at a time when they are growing into manhood, so as to acquire a helper for philosophy. As they grow older and their souls begin to reach maturity, they should increase their mental exercises. Then, when their strength begins to fail and they have retired from politics and military service, they should graze freely in the pastures of philosophy and do nothing else. I mean the ones who are to live happily and, in death, add a fitting destiny in that other place to the life they have lived. You seem to be speaking with true enthusiasm, Socrates, but I'm sure that most of your hearers, beginning with Thrasymachus, will oppose you with even greater enthusiasm, and not be at all convinced. Don't slander Thrasymachus and me just as we've become friends, not that we were enemies before. We won't relax our efforts until we either convince him and the others, or, at any rate, do something that may benefit them in a later incarnation, when, reborn, they happen upon these arguments again. And that's just a throwaway sentence there, but it's clear that Plato would believe in reincarnation. I'm not going to get too distracted by this sentence, but if you want to discuss this further, let me know. But I'll just read it again. We won't relax our efforts until we either convince him and the others, or, at any rate, do something that may benefit them in a later incarnation, when, reborn, they happen upon these arguments again. That's a short time you're talking about. It's nothing compared to the whole of time. All the same, it's no wonder that the majority of people aren't convinced by our arguments, for they've never seen a man that fits our plan, and the rhymes of this sort they have heard are usually intended, and not, like this one, the product of mere chance. That is to say, they've never seen a man or a number of men who themselves rhymed with virtue, were assimilated to it as far as possible, and ruled in a city of the same type. Or do you think they have? I don't think so at all. Nor have they listened sufficiently to fine and free arguments that search out the truth in every way for the sake of knowledge, but that keep away from the sophistications and eristic quibbles that, both in public trials and in private gatherings, aim at nothing except reputation and disputation. No, they haven't. It was because of this, because we foresaw these difficulties, that we were afraid. Nonetheless, we were compelled by the truth to say that no city, constitution, or individual man will ever become perfect until either some chance event compels those few philosophers who aren't vicious, the ones who are now called useless, to take charge of a city whether they want to or not, and compels the city to obey them, or until a god inspires the present rulers and kings or their offspring with a true erotic love for true philosophy. Now, it cannot be reasonably maintained, in my view, that either of these things is impossible, but if it could, we'd be justly ridiculed for indulging in wishful thinking. Isn't that so? It is. Then, if in the limitless past those who were foremost in philosophy were forced to take charge of a city, or if this is happening now in some foreign place far beyond our ken, or if it will happen in the future, we are prepared to maintain our argument that, at whatever time the muse of philosophy controls a city, the constitution we've described will also exist at that time, whether it is past, present, or future. Since it is not impossible for this to happen, we are not speaking of impossibilities. That it is difficult for it to happen, however, we agree ourselves. That is my opinion anyway. But the majority don't share your opinion. Is that what you are going to say? They probably don't. You should not make such wholesale charges against the majority, for they'll no doubt come to a different opinion. If instead of indulging your love of victory at their expense, you soothe them and try to remove their slanderous prejudice against the love of learning by pointing out what you mean by a philosopher and by defining the philosophic nature and way of life, as we did just now, so that they'll realize that you don't mean the same people as they do. And if they once see it your way, even you will say they'll have a different opinion from the one you just attributed to them, and will answer differently. Or do you think that anyone who is gentle and without malice is harsh with someone who is neither irritable nor malicious? I'll anticipate your answer and say that a few people may have such a harsh character, but not the majority. And of course I agree. Then don't you also agree that the harshness the majority exhibit towards philosophy is caused by those outsiders who don't belong and who've burst in like a band of revellers, always abusing one another, indulging their love of quarrels, and arguing about human beings in a way that is wholly inappropriate to philosophy? I do indeed. No one whose thoughts are truly directed towards the things that are Adamanthus has the leisure to look down at human affairs or to be filled with envy and hatred by competing with people. Instead, as he looks at and studies things that are organized and always the same, that neither do injustice to one another nor suffer it, being all in a rational order, he imitates them and tries to become as like them as he can. Or do you think that someone can consort with things he admires without imitating them? I do not. It's impossible. Then the philosopher, by consorting with what is ordered and divine, and despite all the slanders around that say otherwise, himself becomes as divine and ordered as human beings can. That's absolutely true. And if he should come to be compelled to put what he sees there into people's characters, whether into a single person or into a populace, instead of shaping only his own, do you think that he will be a poor craftsman of moderation, justice, and the whole of popular virtue? He least of all. And when the majority realizes that what we are saying about the philosopher is true, will they be harsh with him or mistrust us when we say that the city will never find happiness until its outline is sketched by painters who use the divine model? They won't be harsh if indeed they realize this. But what sort of a sketch do you mean? They'd take the city and the characters of human beings as their sketching slate, but first they'd wipe it clean, which isn't at all an easy thing to do. And you should know that this is the plain difference between them and others, namely, that they refuse to take either an individual or a city in hand, or to write laws, unless they receive a clean slate, or are allowed to clean it themselves. And they'd be right to refuse. Then don't you think they'd next sketch the outline of the Constitution? Of course. And I suppose that, as they work, they'd look often in each direction towards the natures of justice, beauty, moderation, and the like, on the one hand, and towards those they're trying to put into human beings on the other. And in this way they'd mix and blend the various ways of life in the city until they produced a human image based on what Homer too called the divine form and image when it occurred among human beings. That's right. They'd erase one thing, I suppose, and draw in another, until they'd made characters for human beings that the gods would love as much as possible. At any rate, that would certainly result in the finest sketch. Then is this at all persuasive to those you said were straining to attack us? That the person we were praising is really a painter of constitutions? They were angry because we entrusted the city to them. Are they any calmer now that they've heard what we had to say? They'll be much calmer if they have any moderation. Indeed, how could they possibly dispute it? Will they deny that philosophers are lovers of what is, or of the truth? That would be absurd. Or that their nature, as we've described it, is close to the best? They can't deny that either. Or that such a nature, if it follows its own way of life, isn't as completely good and philosophic as any other? Or that the people we excluded are more so? Certainly not. Then will they still be angry when we say that until philosophers take control of a city, there'll be no respite from evil for either city or citizens, and the constitution we've been describing in theory will never be completed in practice? They'll probably be less angry. Then if it's all right with you, let's not say that they'll simply be less angry, but that they'll become altogether gentle and persuaded, so that they'll be shamed into agreeing with us, if nothing else. It's all right with me. Let's assume, therefore, that they've been convinced on this point. Will anyone dispute our view that the offspring of kings or rulers could be born with philosophic natures? No one would do that. Could anyone claim that, if such offspring are born, they'll inevitably be corrupted? We agree ourselves that it's hard for them to be saved from corruption, but could anyone claim that in the whole of time not one of them could be saved? How could he? But surely one such individual would be sufficient to bring to completion all the things that now seem so incredible, provided that his city obeys him. One would be sufficient. If a ruler established the laws and ways of life we've described, it is surely not impossible that the citizens would be willing to carry them out. Not at all. And would it be either astonishing or impossible that others should think as we do? I don't suppose it would. But I think our earlier discussion was sufficient to show that these arrangements are best, if only they are possible. Indeed it was. Then can we now conclude that this legislation is best, if only it is possible, and that, while it is hard for one to come about, it is not impossible? We can. And so there's the next section, and Plato discussing how the philosopher ruler is not impossible. And next we come to the good as the ultimate object of knowledge, and we're coming towards the latter part of book 6 now, so we'll have the good as the ultimate object of knowledge, and then we'll move into the simile of the sun and the divided line. And this is where it gets very interesting, and how the good relates to knowledge, and everything will become clear in the dialogue. And this book 6 and book 7 after it is just so powerful and deserves reading often and regularly to sort of digest it, because it's not easily digestible. I've said this several times, but that one would need to read it over and over and think on these certain passages and paragraphs. But if you enjoy this, guys, please consider sharing it across your social media with your friends, and make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. But now let's hear what Plato has to say about the good as the ultimate object of knowledge. The good as the ultimate object of knowledge. Plato proceeds to the education of the philosopher, with which the rest of this part and the whole of the next part are concerned. 1. He begins with a reminder of the qualities of character which the philosopher must have, and goes on to emphasize that those qualities must be based on knowledge, ultimately on the knowledge of the good, which for him means, as this passage makes clear, the form of the good. After dismissing briefly the views of those who believe the good is pleasure or knowledge, Socrates refuses to give a direct statement of his own view of it, and instead offers to describe it in a simile. Now that this difficulty has been disposed of, we must deal with what remains, namely, how the saviours of our constitution will come to be in the city, what subject and ways of life will cause them to come into being, and at what ages they'll take each of them up. Indeed we must. It wasn't very clear of me to admit from our earlier discussion the troublesome topics of acquiring wives, begetting children, and appointing rulers, just because I knew that the whole truth would provoke resentment and would be hard to bring about in practice, for as it turned out I had to go through these matters anyway. The subject of women and children has been adequately dealt with, but that of the rulers has to be taken up again from the beginning. We said, if you remember, that they must show themselves to be lovers of their city when tested by pleasure and pain, and that they must hold on to their resolve through labours, fears, and all other adversities. Anyone who was incapable of doing so was to be rejected, while anyone who came through unchanged, like gold tested in fire, was to be made ruler and receive prizes, both while he lived and after his death. These were the sort of things we were saying while our argument, afraid of stirring... These were the sort of things we were saying while our argument, afraid of stirring up the very problems that now confront us, veiled its face and slipped by. That's very true. I do remember it. We hesitated to say the things we've now dared to say anyway. So let's now also dare to say that those who are to be made our guardians in the most exact sense of the term must be philosophers. Let's do it. Then you should understand that there will probably be only a few of them, for they have to have the nature we described, and its parts mostly grow in separation and are rarely found in the same person. What do you mean? No, too early. What do you mean? You know that ease of learning, good memory, quick wits, smartness, youthful passion, high-mindedness, and all other things that go along with these are rarely willing to grow together in a mind that will choose an orderly life that is quiet and completely stable, for the people who possess the former traits are carried by their quick wits wherever chance leads them, and have no stability at all. That's true. On the other hand, people with stable characters, who don't change easily, who aren't easily frightened in battle, and whom one would employ because of their greater reliability, exhibit similar traits when it comes to learning. They are as hard to move and teach as people whose brains have become numb, and they are filled with sleep and yawning whenever they have to learn anything. That's so. Yet we say that someone must have a fine and goodly share of both characters, or he won't receive the truest education, honours, or rule. That's right. Then don't you think that such people will be rare? Of course. Therefore, they must be tested in the labours, fears, and pleasures we mentioned previously. But they must also be exercised in many other subjects, which we didn't mention, but are adding now, to see whether they can tolerate the most important subjects, or will shrink from them, like the cowards who shrink from other tests. It's appropriate to examine them like that, but what do you mean by the most important subjects? Do you remember when we distinguished 3 parts in the soul in order to help bring out what justice, moderation, courage, and wisdom each is? If I didn't remember that, it wouldn't be just for me to hear the rest. What about what preceded it? What was that? We said, I believe, that in order to get the finest possible view of these matters, we would need to take a longer road that would make them plain to anyone who took it, but that it was possible to give demonstration of what they are that would be up to the standard of the previous argument. And you said that that would be satisfactory. So it seems to me that our discussion at that time fell short of exactness, but whether or not it satisfied you is for you to say. I thought you gave us good measure, and so apparently did the others. Any measure of such things that fall short in any way of that which is not good measure, for nothing incomplete is the measure of anything, although people are sometimes of the opinion that an incomplete treatment is none the less adequate and makes further investigation unnecessary. Indeed, laziness causes many people to think that. It is a thought that a guardian... It is a thought that a guardian of a city and its laws can well do without. Probably so. Well then, he must take the longer road and put as much effort into learning as into physical training, for otherwise, as we were just saying, he will never reach the goal of the most important subject and the most appropriate one for him to learn. Aren't these virtues then the most important things? He asked. Is there anything even more important than justice and the other virtues we discussed? There is something more important. However, even for the virtues themselves, it isn't enough to look at a mere sketch as we did before, while neglecting the most complete account. It's ridiculous, isn't it, to strain every nerve to attain the utmost exactness and clarity about other things of little value, and not to consider the most important things worthy of the greatest exactness? It certainly is. But do you think that anyone is going to let you off without asking you what this most important subject is and what it concerns? No, indeed, and you can ask me too. You've certainly heard the answer often enough, but now either you aren't thinking or you intend to make trouble for me again by interrupting. And I suspect the latter, for you've often heard it said that the form of the good is the most important thing to learn about, and that it's by their relation to it that just things and the others become useful and beneficial. You know very well now that I am going to say this, and besides, that we have no adequate knowledge of it, and you also know that, if we don't know it, even the fullest possible knowledge of other things is of no benefit to us, any more than if we acquire any possession without the good of it. Or do you think that it is any advantage to have every kind of possession without the good of it, or to know everything except the good, thereby knowing nothing fine or good? No, by God, I don't. Furthermore, you certainly know that the majority believe that pleasure is the good, while the more sophisticated believe that it is knowledge. Indeed, I do. And you know that those who believe this can't tell us what sort of knowledge it is, however, but in the end are forced to say that it is knowledge of the good. And that's ridiculous. Of course it is. They blame us for not knowing the good, and then turn around and talk to us as if we did know it. They say that it is knowledge of the good, as if we understood what they're speaking about when they utter the word good. That's completely true. And what about... That's completely true. What about those who define the good as pleasure? Are they any less full of confusion than the others? Aren't even they forced to admit that there are bad pleasures? Most definitely. So I think they have to agree that the same things are both good and bad. Isn't that true? Of course. It's clear then, isn't it, why there are many large controversies about this? How could it be otherwise? And isn't this also clear in the case of just and beautiful things? Many people are content with what are believed to be so, even if they aren't really so, and they act, acquire, and form their own beliefs on that basis. Nobody is satisfied to acquire things that are merely believed to be good, however, but everyone wants the things that really are good, and disdains mere belief here. That's right. Every soul pursues the good, and does its utmost for its sake. It divines that the good is something, but it is perplexed and cannot adequately grasp what it is, or acquire the sort of stable beliefs it has about other things, and so it misses the benefit, if any, that even those other things may give. Will we allow the best people in the city, to whom we entrust everything, to be so in the dark about something of this kind, and of this importance? That's the last thing we'd do. I don't suppose, at least, that just and fine things will have acquired much of a guardian in someone who doesn't even know in what way they are good, and I divine that no one will have adequate knowledge of them until he knows this. You've divined well. But won't our constitution be perfectly ordered if a guardian who knows these things is in charge of it? Necessarily. But Socrates, you must also tell us whether you consider the good to be knowledge or pleasure or something else altogether. What a man! It's been clear for some time that other people's opinions about these matters wouldn't satisfy you. Well, Socrates, it doesn't seem right to me for you to be willing to state other people's convictions, but not your own, especially when you've spent so much time occupied with these matters. What? Do you think it's right to talk about things one doesn't know as if one does know them? Not as if one knows them, he said, but one ought to be willing to state one's opinions as such. What? Haven't you noticed that opinions without knowledge are shameful and ugly things? The best of them are blind? Or do you think that those who express a true opinion without understanding are any different from blind people who happen to travel the right road? They're no different. Do you want to look at shameful, blind, and crooked things, then, when you might hear illuminating and fine ones from other people? By God, Socrates, Glaucon said, don't desert us with the end almost in sight. We'll be satisfied if you discuss the good as you discuss justice, moderation, and the rest. That, my friend, I said, would satisfy me too, but I'm afraid that I won't be up to it, and that I'll disgrace myself and look ridiculous by trying. So let's abandon the quest for what the good itself is for the time being, for even to arrive at my own view about it is too big a topic for the discussion we are now started on. But I am willing to tell you about what is apparently an offspring of the good, and most like it. Is that agreeable to you, or would you rather we let the whole matter drop? It is. The story about the father remains a debt you'll pay another time. I wish that I could pay the debt in full, and you'll receive it instead of just the interest. So here, then, is the child and offspring of the good, but be careful that I don't somehow deceive you unintentionally by giving you an illegitimate account of the child. We'll be as careful as possible, so speak on. And now we come to the simile of the sun, and before we get into it, there are a few images that help to understand and take it in, and obviously you can go back to this section of the video and sort of pause and try and take it in, but we'll run through, there's two different ones, we'll run through them both quickly, just because it's sort of a pictorial representation of the simile of the sun, and it's much easier to get into, and then I'll read how Plato describes it in the text. The simile of the sun. The simile compares the form of the good to the sun, and may be set in a tabular form as follows. So I'll begin with the visible world and the sun, and then I'll read the intelligible world and the good. The visible world, the sun, the source of growth and light, which gives visibility to objects of sense and the power of seeing to the eye, and is the faculty of sight. The intelligible world, the good, the source of reality and truth, which gives intelligibility to objects of thought and the power of knowing to the mind, the faculty of knowledge. And again, here's another diagram that helps to understand it. Plato and the nature of the good, the analogy of the sun, and I'll just run through the same things again. I'll begin with the sun. The sun is a visible object that makes objects visible to the eye through the power of sight by providing light. So sort of a similar thing, but just phrased in a different way, and then we'll do the same for the good. The good is an intelligible object that makes objects intelligible to the soul through the power of understanding by providing truth. The tree above is the visible object. The forms, universals, are the intelligible objects that the good shines on. Both the sun and the good create their objects. So now back to the text. I will, when we've come to an agreement and recalled some things that we've already said both here and many other times. Which ones? We say that there are many beautiful things and many good things, and so on for each kind, and in this way we distinguish them in words. We do. And beauty itself and good itself and all the things that we thereby set down as many, reversing ourselves, we set down according to a single form of each, believing that there is but one, and call it the being of each. That's true. And we say that the many beautiful things and the rest are visible but not intelligible, while the forms are intelligible but not visible. That's completely true. With what part of ourselves do we see visible things? With our sight. And so audible things are heard by hearing, and with our other senses we perceive all the other perceptible things. That's right. Have you considered how lavish the maker of our senses was in making the power to see and be seen? I can't say I have. Well, consider it this way. Do hearing and sound need another kind of thing in order for the former to hear and the latter to be heard, a third thing in whose absence the one won't hear or the other be heard? No, they need nothing else. And if there are any others that need such a thing, there can't be many of them. Can you think of one? I can't. You don't realize that sight and the visible have such a need? How so? Sight may be present in the eyes, and the one who has it may try to use it, and colours may be present in things, but unless a third kind of thing is present, which is naturally adapted for this very purpose, you know that sight will see nothing, and the colours will remain unseen. What kind of thing do you mean? I mean what you call light. You're right. Then it isn't an insignificant kind of link that connects the sense of sight and the power to be seen. It is a more valuable link than any other linked things have got. If indeed light is something valuable, and of course it's very valuable. Which of the gods in heaven would you name as the cause and controller of this, the one whose light causes our sight to see in the best way and visible things to be seen? The same one you and others would name. Obviously, the answer to your question is the sun. And isn't sight by nature related to that God in this way? Which way? Sight isn't the sun, neither sight itself, nor that in which it comes to be, namely the eye. No, it certainly isn't. But I think that it is the most sun-like of the senses, very much so. And it receives from the sun the power it has, just like an influx from an overflowing treasury. Certainly. The sun is not sight, but isn't it the cause of sight itself and seen by it? That's right. Let's say then that this is what I called the offspring of the good, which the good begot as its analogue. What the good itself is in the intelligible realm, in relation to understanding and intelligible things, the sun is in the visible realm, in relation to sight and visible things. How? Explain a bit more. You know that when we turn our eyes to things whose colours are no longer illuminated by the light of day, but by night lights, the eyes are dimmed and seem nearly blind, as if clear vision were no longer in them. Of course. Yet whenever one turns them on things illuminated by the sun, they see clearly and vision appears in those very same eyes. Indeed. Well, understand the soul in the same way. When it focuses on something illumined by truth and what is, it understands, knows, and apparently possesses understanding. But when it focuses on what is mixed with obscurity, on what comes to be and passes away, it opines and is dimmed, changes its opinions this way and that, and seems bereft of understanding. It does seem that way. So that what gives truth to the things known and the power to know to the knower is the form of the good. And though it is the cause of knowledge and truth, it is also an object of knowledge. Both knowledge and truth are beautiful things, but the good is other and more beautiful than they. In the visible realm, light and sight are rightly considered sun-like, but it is wrong to think that they are the sun. So here it is right to think of knowledge and truth as good-like, but wrong to think that either of them is the good, for the good is yet more prized. This is an inconceivably beautiful thing you're talking about, if it provides both knowledge and truth and is superior to them in beauty. You surely don't think that a thing like that could be pleasure? Hush! Let's examine its image in more details as follows. How? You'll be willing to say, I think, that the sun not only provides visible things with the power to be seen, but also with coming to be, growth and nourishment, although it is not itself coming to be. How could it be? Therefore you should also say that not only do the objects of knowledge owe their being known to the good, but their being is also due to it, although the good is not being, but superior to it in rank and power. And Glaucon comically said, "By Apollo, what a daemonic superiority! It's your own fault. You forced me to tell you my opinion about it, and I don't want you to stop either. So continue to explain its similarity to the sun. If you've omitted anything, I'm certainly omitting a lot. Well, don't. Not even the smallest thing. I think I'll have to omit a fair bit, but as far as is possible at the moment, I won't omit anything voluntarily. Don't. And so now we come to the second part of this section here, where now we come to the divided line. And this is, an extension, if you like, of the simile of the sun and the good. And another way to think about these things, sort of a tool for the mind, a framework for the mind to work with, to consider these things. The analogy of the divided line is, Plato makes clear, a sequel to the sun's simile, its purpose being to illustrate further the relation between the two orders of reality with which the sun's simile is dealt. And so I'm not really qualified to comment on this next chart, but I'll do my best. And this is taken directly from the Penguin Classic book. So if we first look at this left column, we have knowledge and opinion, and then if we jump over to the right column, we have the intelligible realm and the visible physical realm. So it looks as though what is being argued here, or being pointed out, is that knowledge exists in the intelligible realm and opinion in the visible physical realm. And then if we look at the next column, we have here intelligence or dialectic. Then we have mathematical reasoning, and then below this we have belief and illusion, which exist as opinion. So illusion and belief are opinions, mathematical reasoning and intelligence is knowledge. And then in the next line we have D, shadows and images, C, physical things, and then forms. So I believe all this is spoken about more fully in the text that we're going to get to now, and I would advise to come back and view this. And we can spend a lot of time, many months even, on book 6 of the Republic, but not in this video we can't, so I'll read on. Understand then that, as we said, there are these two things, one sovereign of the intelligible kind and place, the other of the visible. I don't say of heaven, so as not to seem to you to be playing the sophist with the name. In any case, you have two kinds of thing, visible and intelligible. Right. It is like a line divided into two unequal sections. Then divide each section, namely, that of the visible and that of the intelligible, in the same ratio as the line. In terms now of relative clarity and opacity, one subsection of the visible consists of images, and by images I mean first shadows, then reflections in water and in all close-packed, smooth and shiny materials, and everything of that sort, if you understand. I do. In the other subsection of the visible, put the originals of these images, namely the animals around us, all the plants, and the whole class of manufactured things. Consider them put. Would you be willing to say that, as regards truth and untruth, the division is in this proportion? As to the opinable is to the knowable, so the likeness is to the thing that it is like. Certainly. Consider now how the section of the intelligible is to be divided. How? As follows. In one subsection, the soul, using as images the things that were imitated before, is forced to investigate from hypotheses, proceeding not to a first principle, but to a conclusion. In the other subsection, however, it makes its way to a first principle, that is, not a hypothesis, proceeding from a hypothesis, but without the images used in the previous subsection, using forms themselves and making its investigation through them. I don't yet fully understand what you mean. Let's try again. You'll understand it more easily after the following preamble. I think you know that students of geometry, calculation, and the like hypothesize the odd and the even, the various figures, the three kinds of angles, and other things akin to these in each of their investigations, as if they knew them. They make these their hypotheses, and don't think it necessary to give an account of them, either to themselves or to others, as if they were clear to everyone. And going from these first principles through the remaining steps, they arrive in full agreement. I certainly know that much. Then you also know that, although they use visible figures and make claims about them, their thought isn't directed to them, but to those other things that they are like. They make their claims for the sake of the square itself and the diagonal itself, and not the diagonal they draw, and similarly with the others. These figures that they make and draw, of which shadows and reflections in water are images, they now in turn use as images in seeking to see those others themselves that one cannot see except by means of thought. That's true. This then is the kind of thing that, on the one hand, I said is intelligible, and, on the other, is such that the soul is forced to use hypotheses in the investigation of it, not travelling up to a first principle, since it cannot reach beyond its hypotheses, but using as images those very things of which images were made in the section below, and which, by comparison to their images, were thought to be clear and to be valued as such. I understand that you mean what happens in geometry and related sciences. Then also understand that, by the other subsection of the intelligible, I mean that which reason itself grasps by the power of dialectic. It does not consider these hypotheses as first principles, but truly as hypotheses, but as stepping stones to take off from, enabling it to reach the unhypothetical first principle of everything. Having grasped this principle, it reverses itself, and, keeping hold of what follows from it, comes down to a conclusion without making use of anything visible at all, but only of forms themselves, moving on from forms to forms, and ending in forms. I understand, if not yet adequately, for in my opinion you're speaking of an enormous task, that you want to distinguish the intelligible part of that which is, the part studied by the science of dialectic, as clearer than the part studied by the so-called sciences for which their hypotheses are first principles. And although those who study the objects of these sciences are forced to do so by means of thought rather than sense perception, still, because they do not go back to a genuine first principle, but proceed from hypotheses, you do not think that they understand them, even though, given such a principle, they are intelligible, and you seem to me to call the state of the geometers, though thought but not understanding. I'll say that again. And you seem to me to call the state of the geometers thought but not understanding, though being intermediate between opinion and understanding. Your exposition is most adequate. Thus there are four such conditions in the soul, corresponding to the four subsections of our line: understanding for the highest, thought for the second, belief for the third, and imagining for the last. Arrange them in the ratio, and consider that each shares in clarity to the degree that the subsection it is set over shares in truth. I understand, agree, and arrange them as you say. And thus ends Book 6 of the Republic. Like I said before, not really qualified to comment or speak as an authority on these things, but one example that my teacher would give me about how to understand this is that what he's saying there, the intelligible realm where the good operates, and the physical realm where the sun operates, and visible physical things. Let's just take a right angle, 90 degrees. My hands aren't going to help understand it. Let's take a 90-degree angle. The true right angle of 90 degrees exists as an idea in the intelligible realm. And when you get your protractor or your ruler or whatever you're going to use to draw your right angle on paper, it's only a representation of the true right angle. It might look like a right angle, but it's just the representation of it. Same with any right angles that you see on a table or a door or whatever. It's just a physical representation of the ideal form of the right angle. And that's my sort of, simple way to explain the difference between the intelligible realm and the visible realm. And another example, just to throw it out there, people discuss the forms, the archetypes. And so a chair that you're sitting on is a physical representation of the form chairness. So every chair is sort of participating in chairness. The fact that it's a chair, you chop one of the legs off and it's less chair-like. You sit on it, you fall over. So it no longer is close to chairness. I don't know what it is. But anyway, very interesting stuff for me. Very difficult to grasp, and again, take a lot of contemplation and pondering. So if you've got time for that, then you're a lucky person, and you should take your time to become a philosopher and develop your character and virtue, like Plato is telling us there in Book 6 of the Republic. And the next book, Book 7, is just as exciting if you're a lover of Plato, because we arrive at the allegory of the cave. And Plato is building upon what we've just learned about the visible and intelligible realms. And he shares with us the allegory of the cave. And it's a very powerful philosophical idea and picture. And that's what we'll be studying next week. And I hope you'll be able to join me, and that you've enjoyed this study. And yes, we are well over halfway now through Plato's Republic, and it just shows what you can achieve by we're just doing one evening a week. We could have done it in 10 days if we wanted to be intense and do it. And I think when it comes to the laws, I'm gonna have to try and do it more regular, because I think that could the laws may drag out a bit more than the Republic, but we'll see. Let's not make any prejudgments. But guys, that's all for this evening. You can join me on Sunday evening, where I think we'll be reading one of the last 2 Ted Chiang short stories. And then a poll will be coming on Monday for a longer live read the following Sunday. But that's all for this evening. I hope you enjoyed that. And hey, look at this before I go. What an end to the stream, hey? Aim for erect. My friend Ryan says he's given a super chat, so I'm very grateful for that. And he says, I'm going to read it and see what it says. Honeyed words, pleasant in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, even more so when become like. And then he says, thanks for doing your part to keeping that sunbeam to the source alive and well. And Ryan, you're very welcome. It's my absolute pleasure. And the fact that you're here and enjoying it makes it all the more valuable to me and anyone else that watches this stream in the future. The fact that you've come across Plato and discovered the simile of the sun through this stream and this channel, it's a great honor for me to be able to share that with you. And thank you, Aim for Arret, for your generous super chat. It makes me smile. I'm closer to the good now. And Green Grapes, you're very welcome. And I hope to see you all very soon on Sunday evening. And then, we'll be going live a lot next week, because I've discovered short stories and they're awesome and they're perfect for the live read. So lots more short stories coming up. But for now, guys, take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your day and week and the weekend even. And I'll see you all soon. Take care now. Bye, guys.